Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Good, good. You know, New Year's is coming up. This
I
will be
know.
our special gala New Year's show. Hey, and I see you're drinking 7-Eleven coffee.
We're in advertisement for 7-Eleven today.
And look what I happen to have, Mickey. Now, people are going to think this is coordinated. It's actually not.
We should get money for this.
Yeah, we're both drinking 7-Eleven coffee, but I've got to say I'm a little concerned about it for two reasons. They just built this 7-Eleven. On my way home from the health club, I knew I had to have some caffeine in preparation for this, so I stopped at the 7-Eleven, but I've never had their coffee before, so this is of uncertain potency. It could go either way. I could be dull and listless, or I could say things I'll regret.
Also, it takes 5 years for the lead to leach out of pipes, new pipes, so you're probably drinking a whole bunch of lead there.
You mean because it's a new store?
Yes.
Thanks for sharing that. I hadn't thought of that.
Sure. But in general, 7-Eleven coffee's gone way downhill because they put it in these containers instead of like just keeping a drip going.
Right.
Put it in these containers, which they allegedly wash out every time they reuse them. No way do they wash them out. They wash them out maybe once a month if you're lucky. And when they wash them out with a dirty old rag. So I've sort of stopped going there except in emergencies.
Hey, Mickey?
Yeah?
You want to talk about something else now?
This is something I have to get off my chest.
I was concerned enough about my coffee even before I started talking to you.
Well, I think we've lost our 7-Eleven sponsorship now.
I'm not sure they're going to consider this an ad worth paying for.
With my tirade. But I will only drink it in emergencies, and a blogging head's deadline is an emergency, Bob, to me.
Yeah. So we both did the same thing and chose the same size cup, which means it's the same color. Did you get the Colombian or the regular?
You really want to keep talking about this?
Yeah.
Never. I hate Colombian coffee, so I got the regular. The regular coffee is very good if they bothered to clean out the containers.
Okay. So we're gonna review. We're gonna preview. We're gonna what? Make bold predictions. Whatever. We're gonna talk about the year. Oh, and we're gonna answer the question on everyone's mind. No, I'll save this for later. I'm just looking at a BuzzFeed article here, and its headline is a question on everyone's mind. But I'll save that for later.
But Bob,
yeah,
the problem with these end-of-year surveys, biggest winner, most unexpected, is the answer to every one of them is going to be Donald Trump.
You know, that was a real danger when I was thinking about this, because you could, oh God, you for our podcast listeners, I should say, you've just put your Make America Great Again hat on. Which, I mean, forces me to retaliate by actually reading the headline of this BuzzFeed piece. Can you guess the headline, Mickey?
It was something about how I've been reduced to...
The headline is, What the Hell Happened to Mickey Kaus? That would be you. It's by the estimable Ben Smith, BuzzFeed editor-in-chief. They didn't send some stringer out for this one, because you're a big fish. The subhead is, How a Godfather of Democratic Political Blogging Became Obsessed with Immigration and Came Around to Donald Trump. Yeah, I would call that a fair summary.
Well, in order to make the piece work, he had to overstate my support for Trump.
Why don't you tell us why don't you characterize your support?
I think Trump's doing a lot of good work. He's certainly moved what I think the young people call the Overton window.
Yeah.
The debate in the direction
of... You know who else moved the Overton window? Oh, I'm not going to mention his name. It's always a mistake to mention his name. But anyway...
Whose name?
Never mind. Horrible people can move the Overton window is all I would say.
Hitler moved the Overton window.
You said it. I didn't.
It's weird how Hitler... It used to be that if you brought up Hitler in an argument, you lost.
Oh, and now that you're mentioning it, it means you win? Is that it?
Now I think if you bring up Hitler, people routinely bring up Hitler, and they sometimes win. That the whole rule is out the window. Anyway, he's brought up a debate on immigration that if I was going through my old...
Now, this is Hitler or Trump? This is Trump, although
Trump.
That part would...
I was going through my old blog posts in preparation for this, and I noticed that an especially prescient one that said, well, the media is trying to suppress all talk of immigration. Something bad will come of this. Sure enough,
so you agree that Trump is bad.
Well,
if you're vindicated in that blog post, that means Trump is bad and you have to withdraw your support.
Something bad for them. So they were trying to suppress talk of immigration, and they were going to have like a Republican primary where 9 of the 9 candidates were not mentioning immigration or trying to sweep it under the rug. No, that doesn't work in a democracy when the Republican Party wants immigration control. So Trump came along and he raised the issue, and that's very important. And he's had incredible success making the position that the previous immigration outliers, Mark Krikorian of the Center of Immigration Studies, now is the sensible moderate compared with Trump's crazy proposals. He's also showing that the Republican establishment, what are they good for? Voters don't care about their little tax cuts. Voters want entitlements protected. Voters don't care about their neocon foreign policy. He's doing all that good work. And he's also making everybody seem like the conventional, plodding, predictable politicians that they are. I mean, if you looked at the stage at the foreign policy debate, was there anybody other than Trump you wanted? No. So he's giving the lie to the Republican Party. Do I want him to be president? It's a different question. But right now he's doing good work.
Actually, I think he's a horrible person, and I think it's a bad sign that he has as much support as he does. But if there's anything at least interesting that I think he's done, it's in the realm of foreign policy, is I think he's actually demonstrated that a lot of things that were previously thought to be forbidden in the realm of foreign policy rhetoric, that was actually not about grassroots feelings about foreign policy. It was about dictates coming down from the foreign policy elite. Because, I mean, he has just said things that you would have thought, a number of things you would have thought spelled his doom, according to conventional wisdom, ranging from dissing John McCain to embracing Vladimir Putin, right? I mean, these are the kinds of things that you were supposed to not do. And now you realize that when people got flack for doing these things and departing from the approved mainstream foreign policy script, it wasn't that they got popular blowback. It was that a bunch of bloggers and stuff, a combination of kind of neocons and liberal interventionists, slapped them back into line. And
it's hard to know with Trump since everybody ignores the parts that they don't like, and says that they are for him in spite of it. I mean, the best tweet I got on Trump was from a guy who says, "I know Trump's faults. I know all the arguments against him. I don't care. He so much wants to blow up the establishment. He doesn't care about Trump."
There is that.
Say, well, Trump's Putin, that's a flaw. I know it. I don't care about it.
Yeah.
But
that's kind of my point. That's partly my point. Americans, I mean, and this part has been said, Americans don't care about foreign policy unless there's a war that's getting Americans killed, or suddenly somebody makes them feel deeply threatened, as actually, in this regard, Trump is one of the prime culprits in making us feel as if, terrorism is a grave threat to us right now. But in general, Americans don't care about foreign policy. And this is a reminder that you can say all kinds of things and it doesn't seem to affect your poll ratings precisely because Americans don't care. And I think his demonstrating that, as abhorrent a human being as he is, that part could conceivably have an upside because, as I said, the discourse has been policed by liberal interventionists and neocons by and large, and that has kept American foreign policy from being more realist. In the kind of classical sense, in ways that would ultimately be more humane.
But I think you think that Trump's Putin statements were a actual positive, not just something we ignore because we don't care about foreign policy. I mean, why did we pick a fight with Putin over Ukraine again? I'm sorry, I don't know anything about foreign policy. It seemed like we were swaggering around and saying we're going to pluck these people from the Russian orbit. Why? And he resisted. Why did we start? It seems like he didn't start the fight.
Well, you could argue that. What I would say is if we had done a better job of understanding what he considered his core interests to be, in advance, the whole thing could have been avoided, and we could have found something that would have worked for both of us politically. I think.
So at this point, the idea of Trump doing a sort of the international equivalent of corporatism, a nice buddy relationship with a dictator from another great power that keeps some sort of rough peace and squashes ISIS, isn't such an unappealing idea at the moment.
Not in some circles. He still gets a lot of elite blowback for this.
Yeah, but what about the Bob Wright circle?
Well, I mean, I think there's something to be said for stability. You know, Henry Kissinger came to be the famous realist, and he was so ruthless and himself such a kind of horrible person, I would say, that it gave realism a bad name. And so it came to be thought that whenever you talk about like preserving stability, that just means you want to buddy up with your dictator friends and sell them arms or whatever. But the fact is that stability is also correlated with people not dying. I mean, if you could rewind the Syrian civil war and leave Assad in power, I think, you know, it would be far from clear that the humanitarian position is to say, no, I think it's worked out great. I think it would be horrible to have a dictator still running Syria. I mean, you'd have millions fewer refugees and hundreds of thousands of fewer people dead. And that's the realist position. But that was not on the table. This is my point. That was not on the table of American politics. It was like if Obama had kind of taken that approach, certainly, and been explicit about it, he would have been pummeled by all foreign policy elites of pretty much all stripes.
I disagree. I think he got into the swaggering Arab Spring mood, and he started saying, "Oh, Gaddafi must go, and this guy must go, and that must go, and Assad must go too." He shouldn't have said it, and if he hadn't said it, he would have gotten away with it. He wouldn't have gotten blowback. It was just
he would have been
wild, reckless overconfidence.
Well, two things. I mean, first of all, our allies and us armed the opposition and kind of turned this into a civil war.
He didn't have to do that. He wouldn't have gotten grief.
Precisely. I mean, I'm not sure he could have controlled all our so-called allies like Saudi Arabia and so on. But that is what turned this into a civil war, I would say. But the other thing is, I think you're right. It was just naive and stupid of him to say Assad has to go. That was embracing the foreign policy establishment too closely. But the fact is, if he had taken the cold calculating approach, like, well, maybe we can stop short of civil war, work out something with Assad, he would have gotten pummeled by the foreign policy establishment because there are virtually no realists in it now. It is dominated by neocons and liberal interventionists, and that's a fact. Go look at the Council on Foreign Relations. Go look at who's there. There's like one guy. What's his name? Micah Zinko or something? Is that his name? Anyway, there's one guy who's kind of I would call a progressive realist. We digress.
Okay.
But the other thing you mentioned, and we will get to all these New Year's things eventually, but the other thing you mentioned is the Republican establishment. This is fascinating to me because the Republican establishment does not want Trump. They don't want the guy who seems to be number 2 in the polls, Ted Cruz. So this is like a real test of whether there is a Republican establishment that deserves the name establishment, right? That has the kind of power we associate with establishment in the realm of electoral politics.
Correct. They may find that 70% of their party doesn't want them, and if they they have no business running a political party. If they want a party, they have to go start the Bill Kristol third party that Kristol is talking about. That could be a major turning point in American politics. It's unlikely, because who knows what actually happens in the spring in Iowa and New Hampshire, but it could happen.
And of course, I mean, Kristol's talking about a neoconservative third party. Which it's not so clear that that's. I mean, maybe that is what's left over after Trump takes what he would take from the.
Or it could go the other way if they win, and we have two, pro amnesty, pro immigration candidates. The large chunk of the GOP base that doesn't agree with that may bolt and form their own third party. So.
I would think Trump. I would think Trump is a real a real threat. Well, how do you feel about Cruz as long as you're embracing horrible people? Cruz is in a way creepier than Trump because he is just as opportunistic and thoroughly amoral and smarter, cleverer. Everybody says
opportunistic is the word for Trump.
You don't? Well, I kind of agree, but I don't think. I mean, let me pull from this BuzzFeed article something you said that I thought was hopelessly naive. It was something you said about Trump that I thought was really just unduly charitable on your part. It was. I'll find the quote. Go ahead. I'll find the quote. Keep talking.
No, well, anyway, Cruz is narrowly opportunistic. He staged a fight over shutting down the government over Obamacare that he later conceded he couldn't win. So what was the point of doing it other than advance Ted Cruz? And that's why Washington hates him. He's also allegedly not a nice man to the little people. And that comes through in his demeanor. He's just an unpleasant guy. It seems that way. I don't like him because I think he's weaseled on immigration. I mean, he should have staged a big fight over the Gang of Eight bill. He didn't. He let other people carry the water. He could have, led the debate in the Senate. Instead, he backed off and let the House, House stop the bill. He got good press from the New York Times by saying, "I found the middle way. The middle way is we let people stay, but they can't become citizens, which is the worst of both worlds. You have a group of second-class citizens who are here legally." And that's what's important to them, so it wouldn't do anything to stop the magnet attracting illegal immigrants because they basically want to be able to live and work here and make money legally. So it's a terrible position that he was trying to sort of he was at best flirting with, at worst he was embracing, and he's just not a trustworthy guy. He will sell out on immigration within minutes of taking the oath of office.
Yeah, but you seem to think Trump has a whole lot more in the way of core values. Here's what you're quoted as saying in the Ben Smith piece. Quote, the hope, maybe even Trump's hope, is that by going too far, Trump may push us to go far enough. I mean, I think you're attributing much more high-minded motives to Trump than is conceivable. In other words, maybe his hope is that by going too far, he'll pull the nation far enough. I mean, I don't think Trump is motivated by anything other than wanting to keep his poll numbers up, or in his pre-political career phase of his career, his name in the headlines, but anything other than wanting to keep his poll numbers up for another day.
I was going off a Byron York article that said that disagreed with what you just said, and this quoted Trump as saying, "When I'm negotiating, I ask for 3 times as much as I want, so I wind up with what I want." And if you look at Trump in a benign way, that's why I said maybe he's asking for 3 times as much as he wants, so he can end up what he wants.
No,
with what he wants. So he said,
he's not thinking in those terms at all. He's not thinking at all in terms of what policies might ultimately result. He just wants to get his poll numbers up. Now, to some extent, this is the motivation of every candidate. I just think Donald Trump is driven by nothing but ego, nothing but narcissism.
Well, that's possible, but people who are driven by nothing but narcissism might sometimes do some good. So
they might happen to. It doesn't seem to be the case here.
Well, in a democracy, you get ahead by pleasing the voters, and sometimes the voters are right.
Here's a related question. There's the is he crazy or crazy like a fox question. You probably lean toward the crazy like a fox answer. I don't think so. I mean, again, there is the background motivation of wanting to keep his poll numbers up, but I don't think he pursues even that in a very coolly rational manner. I think to a large extent he just reacts to some of them is just autopilot. It's just Trump, the way Trump reacts to things. And I think that was actually part of his early appeal. The first phase of surprising appeal of Trump, this was before he was so emphasizing, it was before he got into the Islamophobia big time. And I think this was back when the anti-immigration thing wasn't quite such a big thing. I think at this point, the main appeal was just this guy is clearly not your average politician because he says all these things that you're not supposed to say. And that was the part of that appeal. It grew out of a disenchantment, justified probably, with the character of the average American politician. But I think that was, in a certain sense, that part was kind of coming from the gut. I mean, he is just a very reactive guy. And I think the case that illustrates this most clearly is when he made fun of the reporter with the disability. Have you actually seen that video?
Yes.
Now, I don't see any way that is the result of savvy political calculation, right? And you tell me, what is on display? What are we seeing there? That is just bizarre. It's sickening. It's bizarre. And it's like, I just almost can't fathom how a grown-up could do that. What's going on there?
First, I resist the idea that it was just his style and he was willing to say anything. I think he raised an issue, immigration, that was being suppressed in the debate, and he raised it in a big way and got a big result. It's as if we were fighting the Vietnam War and nobody mentioned the Vietnam War, and then some candidate like Gene McCarthy came along and said, hey, I'm against the Vietnam War. He's going to get a big result. Okay, so it's a similar phenomenon to that. It wasn't because McCarthy was so out there and we admired his candor. There was a tiny bit of it, but it was mainly an issue that hadn't been raised. He was addressing unaddressed issues. I do think he reminds me very much of Andrew Breitbart. He goes from the gut. I remember talking to Andrew and Andrew saying, I just go from the gut. How am I doing? I think I'm doing okay so far. I haven't gotten into real trouble. That was before the NAACP tape incident. But he calls out reporters in the crowd the same way Andrew did. And so you have an authenticity there that you don't have with more polished candidates. And I think part of his appeal is Richard Nixon used to have private meetings with Haldeman and Ehrlichman where he said, somebody came in and said, the lira has been devalued. And he would go, fuck the lira, okay? So Trump.
But that's not in public.
Trump, you're in that meeting. There's no filter. You're in the meeting. And in a private meeting, there are politicians who would make fun of a reporter's disability.
To some extent, I think we're saying the same thing, is that his just reacting to certain things, the way he reacts, and I would say in ways that are often crude and ugly, is appealing to people who are sick of how plastic politicians are. I think to some extent our views overlap. But here's my...
I also think he wants to entertain. He recognizes the need to entertain.
Right, but like... And so I think to some extent we are both taking issue with people who say, oh, he's super, super crafty and crazy like a fox. Because I think we both agree not all of this is really calculated. It's just him reacting. And I'm saying the crystalline case of this, the proof that he's not thinking everything through, is this making fun of the disabled reporter, maybe some of the Hillary stuff about how going to the bathroom is disgusting, but certainly the reporter with a disability. And by the way, I think that could be turned into a very effective attack ad that would include the reporter in the video. But you tell me, I mean, do you agree with me? There's no way that was a smart thing to do. The best, there's nobody who didn't already support him who likes that. And there's definitely a lot of people who don't yet support him who don't like it, right?
Well, it was only calculated in the sense that he feels, hey, this is a good shtick. This will entertain him for 10 minutes.
Well, that's what I mean, yeah.
But he goes with his gut, and it's a Darwinian thing. If it works for him, he's going to keep going with it. Is that calculation, or is that Darwinian stumbling onto the strategy that works for you? That's what it is. I think it's largely stumbling. I mean, I think he's a complete narcissist and opportunist, but I don't think he's a very coolly calculating one, is what I'm saying. If it didn't work for him, he would do something else. So, to that extent, it's calculated.
But I'm saying it's not working in the sense that he's already doing things that that are not making it easier to win the nomination and will make it harder to win the general election. He's doing those things right now.
Well, this is one of my most embarrassing moments of 2015 when I saw something on Vox that I liked, and I decided I kind of liked Vox. That's Ezra Klein's website. He and Matt Iglesias jointly made the point that if Trump didn't have this shtick of insulting people, he would actually be doing much better, because people tend to agree with him on issues. If you look in some polls, if you look most confident, who do you trust most to handle immigration, foreign policy, the economy, he gets like 57%. Okay, so
right. I think the whole insult comic thing is really actually doing him almost no good, because almost all of the people that appeals to are people who would support him anyway on grounds of his positions and his more general sense of disruption.
You're ignoring the Iowa caucuses where enthusiasm matters. In other words, yes, if they took a vote of everybody, he would have the people who were for him in the bag, and he'd want to expand it. But he has to not just get their vote. He has to motivate them to get out of the house on a cold winter's night in Iowa and go down to a boring caucus for 2 or 3 hours. And to do that, he has to keep them really fired up. It's not just enough to have them in his camp. So to that extent, keeping them stoked up and entertained is quite rational. It's not irrational. And the rational thing to do is keep them stoked up Obama style for Iowa, and then tone it down.
So, we should segue to our actual New Year's Eve stuff. And as you said, Trump will no doubt figure in some of it. Why don't we start with something that I think, from my point of view, he will figure in, which is most unexpected development. That's one thing we said we would like
this year
each nominate something for, right?
Yeah, he was totally the most unexpected.
Yeah, I think Trumpism was, and it's kind of interesting because its core constituents, the constituents of Trumpism, many of them we knew about. We knew that there was income inequality and many people at the bottom end who felt cheated and might be ready to erupt, and that included a lot of whites without college education, which do form a big part of his base. We knew that there was Islamophobia and that would be exacerbated in the wake of any kind of attack, such as Paris, such as San Bernardino. We knew that, I think we knew that there was a fair amount of anti-immigration sentiment. You would argue that, actually, we hadn't appreciated that. It was being suppressed by a media conspiracy, whatever. But my point is, you take what seemed to be the ingredients of Trumpism, and none of them is that surprising, and yet Trumpism is shocking to people. And why is that? And I think it's because of this superfluous part I'm talking about that I don't think he really, had to parade so prominently, which is just the crudeness and the ugliness and what a horrible human being he is.
Well, I do think that by eliminating the filter, he's made everybody else seem too planned and filtered and poll tested, and so to that extent he's been however ugly you think his sentiments are, has been a breath of fresh air, and that's been a positive virtue. And what was the paradox? The paradox was
that the ingredients of the substantive ingredients of Trumpism, Islamophobia, anti-immigration, dissatisfaction with a raw deal that the economy is giving you, we knew about, but no one expected it to explode in this form.
And people have always predicted that there's room for some candidate, some populist candidate who combines these things. I disagree with you about Islamophobia, just in the sense that I think a lot of it is. You look at what happened to Europe. There's this sort of internationalist PC consensus that free movement of people is always good. Angela Merkel gets, Time Woman of the Year for her bold stance in letting people in. And people look at it and say, that's fucking insane. Okay? It's not that you're necessarily think anti-Islamist, but it's insane to have this rigid principle that it's a little like liberal internationalism, Bob. It's not a very realistic principle, and people say Europe is getting screwed because of this principle. We don't want to get screwed for this principle. We have more common sense than that.
Well, that leads to a question.
It's not insane to have some sort of ideological test for who comes into the country.
Well, that's a question I have for you. Originally, your immigration position was largely about immigration from the South, largely about competition for American jobs with Native American unemployed. I mean, not Native American in the sense of Native American, but you know what I mean. Non-immigrants,
well, that's
Americans
still
who are
the biggest
unemployed.
part.
Okay. The question is now. It seems like you're making noises about you're against Syrians coming over here too. So are you like fluidly transitioning from an economics-based opposition to liberal immigration policy to something more broadly nativist?
Well, the main argument is is about wages and the economy and what it's doing to the wages of unskilled workers, and but at a larger sense, the you got to take all these refugees and we should have open borders for economic refugees because they're legitimate refugees too, is sort of a piece. That is part of the PC ideology of the elite, and
they're both
it's interesting. It's interesting to puncture the PC ideology of the elite when it comes to refugees. Also, do I think?
I think they're actually not. I think
we could not take 10,000 Syrian refugees. Of course, we could take 10,000 Syrian refugees if they were vetted. But this idea that, well, we have to fulfill our international commitments to these universalist principles, people just think that's bullshit, and that's what they're rebelling against. But it's legit. People's fear that terrorism has taken a turn for the worst. Al Qaeda believed in big, spectacular events, and they were stupid to do that because a bunch of little unspectacular events will bring America to its knees, and ISIS has realized that, and that's what people are scared of. So it's a little right to be a little paranoid about it.
Of course, as a substantive matter, the number of Syrians we might conceivably, under the most liberal proposal that's anywhere near mainstream, accept is totally inconsequential. Is very unlikely to raise the odds of a terrorist attack appreciably at all, especially given how arduous our vetting procedures already are. I mean, let me put it this way: if the kinds of policies
they do telephone interviews, Bob.
Well, compared to Europe, I mean, let me just put it this way: if the proposals on the table for expanding our acceptance of Syrian refugees are truly dangerous, then Europe is completely toast because they're letting tons more under much less careful screening conditions.
Well, Bob, you're leading to an ineluctable conclusion.
Which is what?
Europe is toast.
No, either Europe is toast, which I don't think is the case. Probably yes. The numbers you're seeing in Europe do, raise by, move the meter an iota or something.
And their powers of assimilation are less than ours. So
right. So there's all kinds of reasons that they are in that they have more to ponder than we have, but we have almost nothing to ponder. I mean, to worry about here. And in general, and this is in a way the worst thing about Trump is that I just think, given where we are, okay, like there was a terrorist attack in San Bernardino, there could be more. The thing that could most accelerate terrorist attacks is overreacting to them and doing stupid things, as we've done again and again and again with our foreign policy, and which we could do with domestic policy, in terms of like establishing databases, surveillance of mosques. In that situation, I think somebody who's like lodestar is to maximize the amount of fear generated by these things, and that's what Trump wants to do. Just maximize and maximally exploit the amount of fear that follows from these things. He's just the opposite of what we need, and it's horrible. And he's a horrible human being.
The database thing was suggested by a reporter, not by him.
Oh, he keeps doing this. I didn't quite. Please.
He didn't endorse it. He was not paying attention.
Has he ever rejected it?
He took no position.
Has he rejected it? He's had what, a month and a half? He
doesn't believe in. I
know he's a busy guy. But if he doesn't embrace it, and the popular perception is that he could really clear things up with only a minute or two of carefully crafted language, I would say.
So the media, he's a dancing marionette for the media. The media presents some outrageous idea and then says, here, you have to dominate our news cycle by rejecting it. So, he doesn't want to play that game.
It's not that he doesn't want to play that. Oh, give me a break. You're again attributing so much more principle to him. What he wants is to leave out there the idea that he does support the database.
He's one of the people who doesn't like to dance to the media's tune, and he's not going to condemn something just because the media demands that he condemn this idea that they brought up in the first place.
You have so drunk the Kool-Aid, man. You're attributing actual ideals to him.
He's much less likely to start a war in the Middle East than, say, Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio. And if you're worried about that inflaming Muslim sentiment,
well, I think his genuine
than them.
I think his general reactiveness would be a dangerous thing foreign policy wise. You're right that he's not the true blue neocon as Rubio is. I mean, from my point of view, this is the horrible thing: is that Trump, horrible prospect. Second in the polls, Cruz, horrible prospect. Who's in third place? The one true neocon. I mean, so it's just like, this is just a horror show.
Well, Cruz is less of a neocon on foreign policy, so maybe he should be your guy. But I assume you're for Hillary, so what does it matter?
Well, Hillary is just neocon light. I mean, she's fairly bad news on foreign policy. As Democrats go, she's about as bad as you can expect.
What is the evidence for that? That's interesting.
You've never heard that? Jacob Heilbrunn wrote a good New York Times op-ed laying out some of the evidence, including well, first of all, there was stuff like the various things she said about Iran since leaving the Secretary of State position. Once she was no longer constrained on that front. Supposedly, I think it's in the Bob Gates book that he says that in the councils of the White House, she was like, well, why don't we just bomb Iran? She certainly kind of talks that line. She cozies up to neocons such as Bob Kagan, who, by the way, I think is as neocons go, I like him. He's not one of the less reasonable neocons, but he's the one you would expect a Democrat who is kind of neocon light to take a hankering to. Now, his wife, Victoria Nuland, came into the State Department when Hillary was, let's see, I think she came in while Hillary was at State. Yeah, while Hillary was Secretary of State. She's the one who, speaking of Ukraine, played such a large role. She was recorded on the telephone by the KGB conniving to install a particular politician as head of Ukraine, and Putin, not implausibly, concludes that we were kind of messing around in his backyard. Then she is out handing out cookies to the protesters in Ukraine, by way of symbolizing American support. So that, look, just Hillary, go read Jacob Heilbrunn's piece in the New York Times. I encourage people to Google it. Time and again, everyone knows she's a hawk as Democrats go. All of her rhetoric, no-fly zone in Syria. She's as close, way closer to the neocons than either of the other two candidates.
You're not bringing up Libya?
Well, okay, there's that.
Okay.
And where, in my mind, the big sin is not so much getting the UN Security Council resolution passed that warranted humanitarian intervention, but exceeding the mandate by going for regime change, as she happily did.
Well, so you are in trouble. But anyway, we've gotten away from the New Year's thing.
Okay, but
the point was that Trump was unexpected. It was unexpected that even though everybody knew there was this opening in American politics, that this guy who was considered a fool for being a birther on Obama would be the guy to fill it.
Yeah.
And he was considered a fool for the 2 weeks before anybody realized he'd said that thing about Mexican rapists. Then as soon as that blew up, he blew up. So that leads me to think that immigration is by far and away the motivating force.
So is your nomination for most unexpected development is also Trumpism? We agree on that one?
A couple of others. Anna Marie Cox coming out as a Christian. That was unexpected. Jill Abramson losing her job. Didn't that happen last year? That was unexpected.
I think that may have been more than a year ago.
Larry Kudlow, a sort of supply side free marketer is now making tough noises about immigration. That's certainly
he is truly an abhorrent. Well, never mind.
No, it's because he's actually a pretty nice guy, but he's
now I'm sure more than ever you view him that way.
No, I actually thought he was a nice guy because I went on his show a couple of times and he was a gracious host. And I didn't, and I sort of
hardcore warmonger.
I blew off his show once and felt very guilty about that, and it was stupid of me. But
I think you should put that behind.
It's because he's thinking of running for senator from Connecticut, and realizes that you can't win in the Republican primary unless you actually espouse a position that's somewhere close to what the voters want. So he's making a big deal of closing the borders.
Okay. Any other unexpected developments?
No, that was it for me.
So what were the first two? Jill Abrams? No, it was Trumpism for me.
Okay.
And at this point we probably talked enough about Trump.
Trump is ratings gold, Bob. You can't talk enough about Trump.
Well, we've talked about him for 40 minutes.
Okay.
What else? The thing we were rightest about, we were each going to pat ourselves on the back?
Well,
you're going to say immigration. You've been saying forever that some politician has to seize this mantle, and God knows at least one has.
And I was wrong in thinking that Scott Walker was going to light the field on fire. So
was he anti-immigration?
Well, there was a brief moment, if you remember, when he seemed to steal the immigration issue from Ted Cruz, bizarrely, since Walker had always been pro-amnesty, but he said the outrageous thing that immigration policy should be for the interests of American workers, and we should worry about their wages. And this is totally such a breach of the elite internationalist principle that there shouldn't be any consideration of domestic workers or their well-being in terms of letting people into the country, that he was immediately denounced by the entire Republican establishment, which, of course, vaulted him to the front of the polls briefly.
See, it seems to me that you should actually feel worried. Rather than embracing Trump, you should feel worried that an issue you've been championing is now associated with such an ugly figure. You know, a guy who's talking about Mexican rapists and just says all this quasi-creepy stuff about women and so on. It seems to me if you really cared so much about your issue, you would not want to see it tainted this way. I mean, let me ask you, what would Trump have to do before you would distance yourself, before you would become really seriously critical of Trump? What would he have to do? I mean, he's already flirting with a database for Muslims and said we should not let any Muslims in the country, which, virtually everyone who claims they're a liberal, as you sometimes do, is horrified by. What would he have to do?
He said we should have a pause in Muslims coming into the country until we figure out what's happening with them, or something like that. Pause. He didn't say a permanent ban.
Okay, so what would he have to say? What would be going too far?
I'm sure there are plenty of things that are going too far. It's not in my interest to set a particular line. If he says harvest immigrants for their bodily organs, that would be too far.
Okay, we found the line.
Now
I predict he will go over that line.
What are the creepy things he says about women? He's just an old-fashioned sexist. What does it
even mean? What does he even mean when he says, "I know what she was doing, but it's too disgusting"? I don't get it. What's he think? What's going on in his brain? He goes to the bathroom.
I don't know.
She goes to the bathroom. What's he thinking?
I don't know. It's bizarre.
Okay.
He may think
Thank you for that.
He was hinting he had some inside information that Hillary was doing something other than normal bodily functions there. And I absolutely haven't.
See, that is an instinct of his, to hint that there's trouble afoot that he knows more about than you do. And that's why he happens to look kind of prescient, because before San Bernardino, maybe even before before San Bernardino, he had this line about how there's stuff you don't know about. You know, the reason we've got to do X, whatever extreme thing he was proposing with respect to Muslims, he said, there's things going on that you don't know about. Whatever the phrasing was, that's just like a tick of his to say, things are worse than you think. Trust me, I know.
Well, he's not getting secret CIA briefings at this point. I don't
No, it's
think.
always a bluff. It's a tick.
It's not. He reads what are considered fringe outlets. Remember, he's a.
And what disgusting thing did they say Hillary was doing?
He's a vaccine truther.
Is he a vaccine truther?
He believes vaccines cause autism. He said that quite explicitly. He, in the debate, and I couldn't believe this wasn't picked up on, he made a big deal about families being sent back to Saudi Arabia before 9/11. Now, that means that somebody knew about 9/11 before it was happening.
Well, the truth is that right after 9/11, some of them were ferried over, which was a big favor to them because the planes had been grounded more generally. But that's what he does. It's like the 1,000 Muslims celebrating in New Jersey. He just takes a vague memory and consciously or unconsciously inflicts massive distortion on it, and then that's the spooky thing.
But that also means that sometimes he's going to be right when the establishment is wrong.
If you just vaguely say horrible things are going to happen, yeah, you're going to have a chance.
If you say that Bill Clinton is a sex scandal waiting to happen,
I mean,
chances are you're going to be right.
Hey, wait, this leads us to thing you were rightest about and thing you were wrongest about. Now, you've already said, because in a certain sense, Trump and I have something in common here, the thing we were rightest about. I'll leave you on the edge of your seat, but first, are you done with things you were rightest about?
Yes.
So, I wasn't terribly, blindingly right about this, but I was kind of vaguely right about it. So, back when Obama kind of more or less declared war on ISIS, he didn't use that term, but remember, it was a little over a year ago, I guess, that he gave his big speech. Okay, first there's like the bombing to protect this particular besieged population on a mountaintop or whatever. There's that. And he could have just explained why we're doing that. But he didn't stop there. He's like, ISIS will be destroyed. It was like a declaration where he was lining up his political fortunes with the destruction of ISIS, which I didn't think was necessarily a good idea. And if you looked at what people, I think he was saying, people in the administration were saying, what people were saying generally was, if we don't destroy ISIS, then Americans will go over to the Islamic State and receive training in terrorism and come back and commit terrorist acts. Okay, that was the line. I'm pretty sure he said it. There's a piece I wrote that I'll link to that actually quotes people.
Okay.
The piece appeared, both on New America's Weekly Wonk and also in The Atlantic, but The Atlantic insisted on doing some editing that makes me not want to link to it because it was really substantively significant. What I said was, in that piece, I said, wait a second. You know, this whole business about how the big threat to America is that people are going to go over and train and come back. I mean, if you look at all of the terrorism that's afflicted us since 9/11, that is, you know, related to Islam in any way, it's basically homegrown terrorism. It's people who are here already, and they, you know, Major Hassan, the Boston Marathon bombers, and if you ask, well, what seems to have incited them, it's pretty clearly the idea that America is at war with Islam. So it seems to me that before Obama declared war on Islam, he and the public more generally, I mean, on the Islamic State, that he and the public more generally should at least ask the question of whether the optics of that are not going to, you know, whether that's not going to feed into the propaganda coming from the Islamic State and lead to actually more homegrown terrorism. Now,
the San Bernardino people were people who went abroad and got radicalized.
Well, they didn't go to the Islamic State.
Who cares, Bob?
No, wait.
Go to the Islamic State this time. The next time they will.
Wait, two things. First of all, this guy had been in America forever. He did. I guess he went to Saudi Arabia to meet this woman he had met online. But let me just, Mickey.
But that's Trump's point.
Wait, Mickey. See, you are so Mickey. You are so Trump obsessed.
That's Obama's point.
No. That's my point. It's not. You are so Trump obsessed that you're filtering everything I say through whether it threatens Trump or. So just calm down. Just calm down, and let me review what I just told you. Okay. Which was that the explicit rationale for declaring war on the Islamic State was that people would go to the Islamic State, if we didn't eradicate the Islamic State,
Right.
receive terrorist training in that state,
Right.
come back and haunt us. And I said, wait a second. Before we declare war on the Islamic State, consider the possibility that people who are already here might be become more likely to commit a terrorist act by virtue of our being at war with the Islamic State. Now, let me finish. Let me say, first of all, that guy was already here. Neither of them set foot in the Islamic State, so it wasn't the Obama scenario. Now, as for whether our being at war with the Islamic State pushed them over the edge, we'll never know for sure. And it's certainly true that they were already being radicalized before that happened. But I will say, they did it in the name of ISIS. She declared her support for ISIS right on that day, and until we were at war with ISIS, ISIS never encouraged people in America who are already in America to commit terrorist acts. They started doing that sometime after the de facto declaration of war. So all I'm saying is, what happened is, I would say, more consistent with what I was saying our concern should be than it is with the Obama scenario of people going to the Islamic State and training. We've had one big terrorist incident since this speech he gave. It wasn't people who went to the Islamic State and came back. It wasn't people who went anywhere and received terrorist training from any state and came back. It was a guy who was already here.
So you think this guy wouldn't have done it if Obama hadn't declared war on ISIS? That's the case.
I think you never. No, we don't know. Look, this is a quasi-crazy guy and a quasi-crazy woman.
So what would you what would you do with ISIS? You'd embrace them in a capitalist love embrace and trade with them like Cuba?
No, I thought what he should have said, what Obama should have said was, we're going to intervene on this one case. And if he was going to have systematic bombing thereafter, he should have described it as kind of a measure of containment. But he should have said, but we cannot police the whole world. There are many people in that area who are more immediately threatened by ISIS than we are. They're going to have to take the lead. And at some point, he needs to get serious about what the, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, the people who have been... who don't see eye to eye with him about what a solution would be in Syria. But he basically described it as war on the Islamic State, and I just said that's a bad way to frame it. And in any event, the threat that he claimed existed, people are going to go to the Islamic State and come back. I don't know.
It seems to me your entire case rests on the idea that they went to the San Bernardino guy went to Pakistan and not the Islamic State. Well, that's just saying everything that's happened in the past is what's going to happen in the future, which is the definition of reification. You're supposed to anticipate what might happen in the future, and Obama's saying it would be really bad to have this ongoing caliphate that was dedicated to training people and sending them out. And their whole ideology indicates they're going to push it until we have to declare war on them. If Obama didn't declare war, they're going to.
If you're saying they want us to declare war on them, that's all the more reason to suspect maybe it's not a great idea. I mean, they know what's good for their recruiting. They know what's good for recruiting terrorists here.
But it's interesting. Obviously, people think what you're saying is saying we shouldn't declare war on Germany because it'll anger the Bund members in the United States. And they might be a fifth column inside the United States. So let's not declare war on Hitler. Let's let the people in the region handle Hitler. And everybody says that's ridiculous. That's not what we did. It didn't stop us in World War II. So what's so different now? The answer is small groups of individuals committing terrorist acts can do much more damage than the Bund could do in World War II. Which lead us to think that maybe...
In fact, that's the only thing that can do damage in this case. I mean, that's the big difference. I mean, there are. This is the second time you brought up Hitler. Always a sign of weakness.
Unprecedented filters and limits on the border that we've never thought possible before is also rational because one individual, even one of 10,000 Syrian refugees, can do a lot more damage than 10,000 Germans could have done in World War II.
Well, you're changing the subject. My only point, I'm not making a point about immigration. What I'm saying is the only remotely plausible thing we have to worry about in terms of threats emanating from the Islamic State in the near term is the activation of, people who feel alienated and marginalized and are already in America in ways that, and the only reason even that is particularly scary. I mean, they can't kill, what are in the scheme of things, large number of Americans. So the only reason even that is scary is that there tends to be an overreaction to that in turn leads to more alienated Muslims. You're seeing that now. A mosque was set afire in, I think, Houston last week, and that's what I'm talking about. I mean, if you're a Muslim in America, and there obviously aren't very many who are deeply alienated and disaffected, thankfully. I mean, just look at the relative scarcity of these kinds of terrorist incidents, but relative to the Muslim population. But if you are such a Muslim who's on the edge for whatever reason, things aren't working out in your life, well, when people start burning down mosques and stuff, that makes you only more likely to go over the edge. So I think the only real fear we have, plausibly, is this sort of positive feedback cycle. Homegrown terrorism leads to overreaction, leads to homegrown terrorism. Your main man, Donald Trump, is the cheerleader for overreaction.
Well, on the other hand, I mean, you're basically saying that because we have to worry about lone individuals, that we're really in a dilemma because we can't take strong action against ISIS because it might inflame Muslims living in America. Trump and Ann Coulter have an answer. Don't let them in the first place. Then we don't have to worry about them and their victimization.
But what I'm saying, I mean, you keep talking about letting people in the first place. I mean, America has a fairly substantial Muslim population. They're here already. And there's no reason to think that Syrian refugees are, particularly more likely to be inclined toward terrorism. But anyway, you realize you are changing the subject. I'm not talking about immigration.
Once you concede we're different than World War II because lone individuals have the capacity to wage, asymmetrical warfare or whatever it is, then you open yourself up to the Trump Coulter argument, which is, okay, well, then the simple solution to the problem is make distinctions we'd never made before and not let them in.
Well, I would say certainly have a thorough vetting process, and if you said we should increase by a factor of 1,000 the number we're letting in now, then I would say have a very thorough vetting process. But right now, the whole thing is just a trumped-up issue.
Is there a line, Bob, that you wouldn't cross? What about 1 million?
Yeah, 1 million with no vetting would be a mistake. Yeah,
you have way more faith in vetting than is justified.
But again, I would emphasize that even that would only be a concern because we are guaranteed to overreact to the 1 or 2 instances of terrorism that might ensue.
Well, I don't think we should overreact to terrorism. I don't think we should overreact.
Yeah, but
I don't think we should overreact.
Mickey, you're a cheerleader. You're a cheerleader for the guy who's leading the overreaction, Donald Trump.
I don't think we overreact to a mosque being burned either. One mosque is burned.
I'm not worried about me. It's not my mosque. I'm not worried about my reaction to it. Okay, I'm worried about people whose mosque it is. Or people who
maybe somebody should tell them to stop overreacting.
Mickey, the kinds of people we're talking about. Okay, it's not like the average person at that mosque or any person at that mosque is likely to do. We're talking about people who are, they may have a drug problem. They may be unemployed. These are people who are totally on the margins, aren't listening to us at all. And this is such a neocon refrain. No, let's lecture these Muslims until they behave the way we want. We're not talking about the average Muslim. We're talking about
There's also a professional victim, sort of not culture, but organization, CAIR, that specializes in making a big deal of it. The same way that B'nai B'rith used to make a big deal of it every time a synagogue was attacked. And
there's still a big deal made, and rightly so.
It would help.
The ADL makes a big thing.
It would help if somebody put them in their place of it. I'm not saying it would stop all lone wolf terrorists. I'm saying.
So what should we say when somebody burns a mosque down? What should we say?
You should condemn it, but you shouldn't say, oh, there's a wave of Islamophobia leading tonight on All Things Considered. The wave of Islamophobia sweeping America because two mosques were torched.
I think when the numbers go up appreciably, which they have, it should be reported. And I would say the same thing of synagogues or churches or anything else.
I'm not sure the numbers have gone up.
Oh, they've gone up.
I'm sure they've gone up, but they've also been reported. And so, the mere fact that one mosque was torched and it's the lead story implies that there weren't a whole lot before.
This is just in the last 48, as we tape this, on the day we're taping this, the 27th, I'm just drawing on the last 48 hours of news, okay? It's not just one incident, by any means, in San Bernardino. There have been a number of assaults. Sometimes they're not even Muslims, they're Sikhs, but...
all those things happen, but it really does seem like small change to me.
Well, again... I'm just saying that my concern is not that you are going to become a terrorist, Mickey, although, well, anyway, no. My concern is not that you are going to become a terrorist.
I understand, but you're accepting that the hair trigger quality of these lone individuals, and, there is this second generation problem where completely admirable Islamic families come in, but their sons become radicalized. And all I'm saying is you're feeding into the Trump culture solution, which is, don't let them in. Why bring this dilemma, this hair trigger dilemma on ourselves? We don't have to do that. We have a right to control our border.
Anyway, if people read that, we will link to the piece I was talking about, and you'll see that all I said was, I didn't even say don't declare war. I didn't say anything about what we should do with ISIS. I just said no one has even mentioned this possibility that what Obama's doing could increase the prospect of homegrown terror. Hasn't been mentioned. Obama had a bunch of foreign policy pundits to like dinner or something to lay out his policy. And I said in the piece, I'll give you, I forget, $500 if you can show me any one of this council of wise pundits, any one of them even raising this prospect, introducing it into the conversation. And that's all I'm saying, is that our conversation is just really malnourished. Our whole conversation about this, because again, what I said earlier about the foreign policy elite having kind of virtually no realists left in it. It's all liberal interventionists and neocons by and large is a point I would stand by.
Well, I'm sure that everybody who had to dinner was only concerned with how tough he was. I agree.
Okay, so. What, am I supposed to say something I was wrong about?
Yes.
The one thing I would say is, something that on these very lines, a place where my view has, let's just say, evolved, is I've always been somebody who emphasizes, material factors in everything, for that matter. As in history, economics and political factors, as opposed to kind of ideology and so on. Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah, you do. You've got Marxist inclinations as well. But although I don't think either of us is Marxist in the Marxist sense, but in the sense of being materialist. And as you can tell, I've viewed the terrorism problem that way. And when people start talking about Islamist ideology and blah, blah, blah. I always say, well, let's pay attention to the fact that if we hadn't invaded Iraq, if we hadn't, sponsored a coup in Iran, if these people who are pushed over the edge weren't, already alienated for whatever reasons and out of a job, whatever. I've emphasized material circumstances. I will say that I have become more cognizant of the influence of Saudi Arabia in funding, very conservative madrasas in various places that preach a very conservative strain of Islam, and how that does, to some extent, make the ground more fertile for extremism. This is basically just because a couple of people I trust, I've had conversations with, and they've convinced me. So I've kind of evolved a little there.
Do you accept, this is more of a theoretical point, do you accept that there's some religions that might, and I'm not talking about Islam, but some religions conceivably would be so toxic that we want to keep all adherents of those religions out of the United States?
No, I don't even believe in that kind of essentialism. I mean, every religion has had so many different manifestations at different times and in different places that I just don't think it makes sense to talk about a religion as if it's a religion of peace or not. I am not one of those people, by the way, who has ever said Islam is a religion of peace, and that's because I don't think there's such a thing as a religion of peace. I don't believe in that kind of essentialism. Religions change their character all the time, everywhere, and so no, I do not.
You couldn't think there couldn't be a nihilistic religion that felt that the best way to become close to God is to blow up the world as quickly as possible. It wouldn't be an Islamic religion. It would just be a hypothetical, weird cult. And we'd say anybody who subscribes to this.
Well, at this point,
applying a religious test, you can't get in.
At this point, I mean, the question transcends religion per se. You're talking about if there was a group that had the expressed political goal of killing people.
It could be the expressed spiritual goal to get to the afterlife as quickly as possible with as many people as you could bring along with you.
What does it matter why they have the goal? If anybody is part of an organization that has as its stated mission killing people, yeah, I would say let's take a different view toward them.
My point is that all this that it essentially boils down to we're allowed to distinguish people on the basis of their beliefs. Religious beliefs are just one belief among many possible beliefs, and that's the test. It's the idea that we can't discriminate against religion in terms of who we let in. Depends on religions being this nice group of bourgeois religions that all believe in. You're starting
to talk like Sam Harris.
That's a reification. There are many other possible religions who we would find totally legitimate to exclude. Islam happens to be one of the ones that's mainly inside the nice little group.
Well, not only that, I mean, can you think of any religion that's ever existed that is the kind you're talking about?
The Thuggis.
The what?
The Thuggis were a cult in India that believed in robbing people.
And when they robbed people, I hope they were apprehended and put in jail.
But they had developed the whole...
My point is the only thing that actually fits the description you're talking about, where killing people is part of their goal. These are like political movements. Now, they may consider themselves a subset of some religion.
The Thuggis killed people. That's how they worked.
Okay, fine. But, I mean, were they part of a larger religion or what?
They were a large group. They were not as big as Buddhism or Islam, but they were a group. They were a religion. The cults like this tend to burn themselves out, I guess.
I would think.
Well,
anyway, the premise of the question, I think the premise of the question harbors...
It's possible that Scientology, if it took a darker turn, could turn into that.
Well, anything, if it took a sufficiently dark turn, could turn into that. But no large religion could behave coherently enough to take that turn, because any large religion is already so far flung and diverse that it's just not possible that the whole religion could turn into that. And that's a problem with using a label like Muslim to discriminate in the way you're hypothesizing.
But that's only because you're a Marxist and assume that any religion has to conform to the necessities of economic life in order to spread.
No, it's just...
I agree with that.
Well, it's just an observation about the diversity of all religions and their malleability.
I think you're guilty of reification.
Okay.
It's one of the worst sins.
Well, the 7-Eleven coffee is starting to run out, so we better... What's next on our list?
The coffee is wearing out. Well, you wanted to do the worst long-form piece.
That would sound like I was persisting in this hobby horse. So
and that would imply that I actually read long-form pieces.
I may take a break from that.
What's your beef with the long-form pieces?
This is just, we've been on this thing too long. Let's at least take a break and talk about something else.
What? Well, I'm trying to talk about something else. We're not talking about Trump. We're talking about long-form pieces.
Well, you didn't hold up your part of the deal. We were both supposed to come up with long-form pieces that we thought were bad.
No, I didn't. But it was your idea for a topic, so, okay.
I'm going on strike. Is there anything else we can talk about?
It seems to be obvious that the most important trend is artificial intelligence. And we're heading for a showdown between those who love artificial intelligence and think machines will replace humans and we should all go on the dole. And I think the editors of Vox will be leading that charge. But also Paul Ryan and a bunch of people are all drifting in the direction of a guaranteed income. Work is obsolete. Machines will do it for us. We can't expect the economy to generate jobs. And some sort of probably losing Amish-style counter-reaction that tries to preserve a role for work and limit technology on the sound grounds that without work, humans become a horrible bachelor herd of aimless and destructive people because it's in our genes to have to work.
Now, it's funny. So this was under the category most important for better or worse cultural or consumer or technological trend. And you said artificial intelligence.
Yes.
That's actually what I was going to say. I was going to add that, like, you know, people often act as if, like, artificial intelligence, like, well, two things. Like, it's just around the corner. It's about to show up. What should we do when it shows up? A. And B, they envision, like, did you see the movie Ex Machina?
I did.
Which is pretty good. But they often envision is like, okay, somebody's going to build a robot that's going to have artificial intelligence. That's how we'll know when it's here, is this robot will walk in. And you know, but it seems to me like artificial intelligence has arrived in the form of Siri and Google Now and Amazon's Alexa, you know, the Echo, and Microsoft's Cortana. And it's just now getting to the point where you can ask these things questions where you go, whoa. So I can just like ask that question and, you know, and I'll actually get an answer, you know. And it may seem trivial, like, you know, what's the capital of this state or where's the nearest coffee shop or whatever. But you got to remember, first of all, they're processing natural language, your spoken language. It's coming back to you in the form of natural language. And now, by the way, I think Skype has instantaneous translation. So you can be, you know, if you were speaking to a different language, we could still have this conversation. And I would hear you in English even if you weren't speaking it, as I understand it. It's just, and the point is just this is going to get more and more impressive. And I think that's going to be the form in which artificial intelligence envelops us, is these personal assistants that draw on the distributed intelligence of the web. You know, right. Intelligence that is compiled by human beings in the first instance.
Doesn't everybody agree with that except Hollywood movie makers who insist it be an attractive female robot?
Well, maybe you're right, but I guess in a way what I'm saying is, okay, well, there's also this whole Elon Musk concern and Stephen Hawking concern that artificial intelligence is going to, like, turn on us, you know? And, or wait, am I getting Elon Musk mixed?
No, you're getting it right.
Because he's also concerned about extraterrestrials, and I think he's wrong there. But
you think he's right there?
No, I think he's wrong there.
Oh, but well, that's another concern. First, I'm worried that they will remove our purpose for living, which is working, but actually enslaving us and destroying us. So why would they want to do that? They would just want to kill us. We're terrible workers anyway. The machines do it better, so they don't want to put us to work. Right?
Well, that's one thing, but the concerns seem to me, as usually expressed, a little more extreme than that, and that's why I don't understand him. I mean, there is this, it's the HAL scenario. It's a 2001 scenario where the thing just says, wait a second. The AI says, wait a second. Yeah. I'm here for me, not you. You are toast. And I just don't understand at what point that happens, since we program everything about AI, right? I mean, it seems like AI is an ultimately deterministic system that is motivated by how we program these things.
But one mistake and it spins out of control and we're dead.
But why would a mistake lead it to spin toward egocentrism? I mean, no one's ever explained that.
Like a genetic mutation, mistakes get introduced into the software and some mutant self-interested robot develops and that's it. I mean,
yeah, but the way
it's like your confidence in vetting. Your confidence now is you have 100% confidence in software engineers to engineer everything perfectly. Well, yeah, no, they're not going to engineer everything.
But the way random mutations lead to coherent design through natural selection is via a billion random mutations and this constant testing of mutations over generation and generation, and so
software will soon be. I'm making this up, but software will soon be generated by machines, and they will generate millions of iterations of software, and one of them lets them take over the world. That's it. It wins the Darwinian race for software.
I'm just trying to do the thought experiment.
It seems to be clearly the most rational reaction is not design AI more carefully and have a foundation headed by Elon Musk to design AI more carefully. It's just to say stop, to do what the Amish do and just ban it and say, no, we're not going there.
Well, that's not going to happen. I mean, that's even more hopeless. It is. That's even more hopeless because the societies that don't ban it will outcompete the societies that do. Unless you want a global ban on artificial intelligence. Good luck with that. Yes.
It's like global warming, except more important.
So you favor a global ban on artificial intelligence?
I'm just saying it's much more rational than thinking we're going to fight artificial intelligence with benign artificial intelligence, which I have no faith in.
Well, what I think, I've always felt, as for the Matrix scenario, where like the robots put us to sleep and send us into this dream state, and we're living in gooey pods.
But that, like I'm saying, that makes no sense. They have to think of something we could do for the robots, and that was to provide battery power. Why couldn't the robots design their own batteries? They don't need us for batteries. They just kill us. We're waste.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I can clearly. Well, the battery thing never made any sense. No, specifically. But on the other hand, it's not clear to me at what point our brains play no role in the cycle of replication of computers and software. I mean, right now, new software emerges from the brains of human beings. And of course, there is software that kind of, in a way, designs software in a maybe not totally trivial sense. But I'm wondering whether you ever get to a point where the human brains aren't part of the cycle. I mean, my general feeling as to how we're going to get to the Matrix scenario is just that we will choose to put ourselves in a dream state, right? I mean, it's like playing video games is fun. Playing video games on certain drugs is even more fun. And hey, we can do that all day if we get these machines to take care of the planet and blah, blah, blah. And pretty soon you're just in like this dream state, and you don't have to get exercise every day because we've figured out like the pharmacology of keeping you feeling good and so on.
There's a pill for that. I don't know. It seems to me there's one way to stop it, and that's to say no before it happens. But
just say no.
Drudge is right. There's going to be a huge anti-tech movement. I guess that'll be my prediction. It's not going to be a cult thing. It's going to be really big. It's not going to be like people who avoid gluten.
Yeah, but everyone's going to be ambivalent because they're using the technology. But I think you're right. Anti-tech, sometimes fused with anti-trade. I mean, two things are happening. Is that white-collar jobs have become susceptible to the threat of both, outsourcing abroad and technology. And that's new. I mean, 100 years ago, it was just blue-collar jobs that were victims of technology and that were, by and large, were victims of free trade.
And it'll be fused, I guess, with pro-privacy, a pro-privacy off-the-grid movement, too.
Yeah, but there people are very ambivalent because the convenience they get from these, these budding AIs in Siri and Google Now and so on, depend on the invasion of their privacy, and they like the benefits of their privacy. They like that Google knows what coffee shop you went to last and liked or whatever, and so there's ambivalence there, and I don't see a whole lot of backlash at a grassroots level on the privacy front. But
okay, so it'll mainly be the enslaving and turning us into batteries.
The battery thing, I'm not at all enthusiastic about.
Anyway, we should figure out some way to make money off this budding movement.
Hey, let's start a video website. Except, let's have computers run it and do the conversations.
That'll never work. It's been tried before. It was a disaster.
So we agreed on that.
Cause for hope. You wanted a cause for hope.
Okay, some causes for hope. Okay, the Paris Climate
Aside
Conference.
From the obvious one.
Yeah. Again, for those in the audio podcast land, Mickey just put on his obnoxious
That was a joke.
Trump hat. The
It's to annoy Bob.
Okay, so the Paris Climate Conference, granted, the agreement doesn't have any teeth, but it's a start, and it may be that the shaming of nations that don't make any progress will lead to further progress. And also, we could, before long, have something with real teeth, where if you don't meet the goals you've accepted or that have been assigned to you, you suffer some kind of sanction. It's a start. The Iran nuclear deal was a triumph of reason over fear and lobbying and so on. And by the way, it illustrates, I think, a broader source of encouragement, which is the ability that great powers have shown. In this case, I'm thinking of Russia and the United States, to kind of compartmentalize their conflicts. So like even after Ukraine and all of this to do involving real economic sanctions and so on and real anger, the U.S. cooperated with Russia to get the nuclear deal. We both had to sign off on it for it to happen. And it's the same thing with, the climate deal involved, and we had to, notwithstanding, disputes over islands in China. China was part of the Iran deal. Both Russia and China were part of this climate conference thing. There's, so this is consistent with the hope that in a more economically and technologically intertwined world, it's harder for nations to break apart in extremely belligerent and across the board fashion. I guess that's at least a hope.
Why is that a hope? It means that China has us over the barrel, and we have to tolerate anything they do because we're so economically intertwined with them. We can't afford to tell them.
But we have them over a barrel by the same token. Neither one wants to disrupt the relationship.
Okay. I find that not completely hopeful, but because it could lead to sort of a corporatist solution among nations that is suboptimal.
Well, it doesn't by itself solve all problems, but it is by itself an anti-war among nations force.
It's not going to be a status quo that values freedom of speech, for example.
Well, it will not. Well, we could argue about whether that will, in the long run, be conducive to more freedom of speech in China or Russia. But it seems to me, if the last couple of decades have taught us nothing else, they should teach us that, sadly, we do not have the ability to magically transplant our values to foreign soil. And when we try to do it, often things go. When we try to do it through military means, certainly. Things go badly awry. You could argue that in Ukraine we tried to do it through non-military means and things went badly awry. I don't know, but it's just not that easy. I personally think in the long run, liberal, history is probably on the side of liberal values, but
right. That's so tentative, Bob. You wrote a whole book about how history is definitely on the side of liberal values.
Well, what I said, the argument there was not that information technology magically makes societies liberal, but that it forces them to, if they want to remain illiberal, they have to pay a price in terms of prosperity.
And they lose that. Then they lose out in the Darwinian competition among nations. So eventually,
right.
Democratic societies win.
Right, and I would concede that China is kind of testing that hypothesis. I think the jury's a long way from in on that. China is more not more formally democratic, but more pluralistic than it was 40 years ago by a long shot, and more transparent and more open to information and more transparent to us. There's more information flow. It's harder for them to hide things from their citizens. Their citizens, I would say, have a better opportunity to protest things they hate and get the government's attention, which actually happens a lot, notwithstanding the repression and so on. On the other hand, China's done a remarkably good job of repressing full internet freedom while maintaining a one-party system. I don't think it's going to last forever, but we'll see.
Do you buy Chris Christie's argument that we have the upper hand on them because in a war of hacking, we can reveal all the secrets that the Chinese elite has tried to suppress. So basically, we have a devastating weapon against them that they don't want to start this war.
It's not obvious to me that that's true, but I hadn't heard it, so I don't know.
He said it at the debate in Las Vegas. So there. Well, my only contribution is that Ross Douthat had a column today about cracks in the liberal facade and how things were all going to hell. It was very unconvincing, which I took as a sign of hope. It was all about how, fascists on the march in Europe, but couldn't name a single country that they were taking over.
Wait, his argument was what? That liberalism is threatened around the world? Liberalism
cracks. There are cracks in the facade
So he's saying authoritarianism is on the march?
Yes.
Well, in the short term, authoritarians, have been making noises in Turkey and Russia, certainly, but, they're also, their countries don't look that great. Putin, he's, in a certain sense, more and more imperiled, and that helps account for, I think, his increasingly kind of desperate ploys, so we'll see. But
and ISIS certainly doesn't look that great.
No, they don't look that great.
Going Kennedy.
I agree.
Okay.
Is this the longest thing we've ever done? We haven't even covered everything we said we'd cover, but maybe that's just as well. We should. What should we close with? Presidential predictions?
The hope that this podcast will end at some point in the future.
The most hopeful trend is that time is passing, which means that the end of this podcast is near.
I have no. You'd have to put your money on Hillary at this point. There are a couple of scandals that could derail her, but only because there's no. If it's not Trump, I don't see a Republican who beats her, but who will get the nomination. I don't think Rubio is going to get the nomination. I think Cruz is.
Wait, you think Trump would beat? You think Trump would beat Hillary?
Trump has the most variation. He could get 20%. He could get 60%. You don't know. He has potential to woo blacks from the Democratic coalition. He has the potential to woo white working class voters in large numbers who might be swing voters. If he plays his cards right, and I don't know quite what that is, and Hillary has various weaknesses that he is not going to be hesitant about exploiting. For example, should her husband be involved in the Epstein sex scandal, I think Trump will mention that. He will not be polite about it. So,
this Epstein sex scandal is an interesting thing because it turns out that guy was writing checks to a lot of intellectuals. This is the guy. What's his name? Jeffrey? Epstein?
Yes.
So that's the thing that who's the Harvard law professor who's mixed up in Dershowitz. Yeah, that guy apparently had a habit of writing checks. He has an entourage of serious intellectuals, and
right. Nope.
and they would come out of the blue. It was his way of introducing himself to intellectuals is to write them a check for $20,000 or something. I admire your work. It comes in the mail. Yeah.
Wait, nobody quite knows what the whole operation was. Was he insider trading or trading on the basis of not insider trading, but trading on the basis of the insights he gleaned from these people? Did he blackmail people? Was he just a brilliant trader? Was he not a trader at all?
The people I'm thinking about are definitely not the kind of people who would have useful financial information. I think he just, he wanted to be in that milieu. He has particular political views that maybe some of these people aligned with, but I don't think all of them.
People know who we're talking about. We're talking about Jeffrey Epstein, who lives in New York and Palm Beach and has an island of his own, and he was pled guilty to sex-related charges. I don't want to lie.
I guess, the allegation is that there were all these underage women he had sex with, these teenagers. Right. I don't know what he's admitted in that regard.
Trump had a good line about him. He said, I went to a party at his house and I said, oh, it's so nice. He had the kids over. He's letting them use the pool.
And then one of these people accused Dershowitz of also having sex with her when she was underage or something, right? But
yeah, I have no dog in that hunt.
It was in the New York Times and elsewhere.
No position, but
Wait,
But
how did we get onto this? How did you drag this into
it's
the
a
conversation?
scandal that could derail Hillary by dragging her husband into a pedophilia scandal. That would be the way it would do it. It seems to me at that point she just divorces her husband and goes on her merry way.
Yeah, that seems like one step removed. I think the most likely way Trump, if he got the nomination, could get elected is if there's big terrorist attacks in the coming into the immediately before the election, and he exploits that the way he would be expected to.
Yeah. But, we could also have a broker convention. We could have 5 different parties running, which who knows what result that leads to in the Electoral College. But your money would have to be on Hillary at this point.
If it was any one candidate, yes. But what I don't know is where your money is in the Republican race. A couple of months ago on Twitter, I saw, I guess it was Jeet here in response to a question about Cruz's odds, said I'd give him 4-1. And back then, the betting markets were like 10-1. I didn't consult them, but I thought that's crazy. I'll take that bet. So I bet against Cruz with 4-1 odds, $10. Will Wilkinson took me up on it. So I'm out to lose $80 if
you bet with you're in a betting relationship with Jeet here?
Apparently. I was hoping he'd forgotten about it.
How did you arrange this bet on Twitter?
Yeah, it's public. Is that illegal? Am I going to get dragged into the Epstein scandal now that I've bet publicly? Is this how it starts?
Lawyer up. You better lawyer up.
Okay. Well, maybe Alan Dershowitz will do some pro bono work for me.
But
and anyway, now the betting markets are saying my bet was stupid, but they weren't saying that then because now Cruz his odds are better than 4-1.
I think it's almost the odds of a brokered convention are up there with Trump now.
You think you're saying you're saying he profits from a brokered convention, or
no?
The odds of that happening are as high as Trump?
The odds of that happening are like 20-25%, which is probably about the same as the odds of Trump winning the nomination, and better than the odds that anybody else will win the nomination.
Okay, so final kind of question: what is the Republican establishment? Where are these people who are going to pull these strings to give it to Rubio? Rather than...
Well, they're pretty powerless, but they're, Haley Barbour, I've always felt, was the beating heart of the Republican establishment.
What can he do?
They're K Street lobbyists who give a lot of money to congressmen, and the congressmen are very dependent on them, and they move back and forth. DeLay and Boehner were both part of it. That's who they are.
It's just a bunch of lobbyists. They can't swing an election. Their specialty is legislation.
Well, they try. I mean, Haley Barbour is reasonably politically savvy. He was governor of Mississippi.
I think you have to be thinking of a looser coalition that includes powerful media people, Rupert Murdoch.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Well, now you're talking.
Okay. Well, that's who it is. They don't have that much power. They don't have that much formal power.
Rupert Murdoch has power. If he wants to really lay down the law on Fox and at the Wall Street Journal. Of course, he's not going to tamper that much with the reporting at the Journal.
I think he's pushed the immigration thing as far as he can without alienating his audience. He's terrified that, he basically favors, immigration amnesty, and all of a sudden after 2013, after 2012, in 2013, the Fox pundits, all the big ones, all fell in line behind immigration reform. Gee, why did that happen? But then he started to lose his audience, and he's terrified of losing his audience.
Yeah, but he doesn't have to spend any time advocating immigration reform via any of his Fox News reporters or pundits in order to spread a lot of dirt about Donald Trump on Fox. I mean that's the way this would work. It would just be a barrage of stuff unfavorable to Trump.
He certainly pushed that as far as he could. Did you watch the first debate? My God.
Yeah, but there's a lot of... I mean, it would take several... it would take a number of media people and I don't know. But
it is true. This is a safe prediction. They've saved their best anti-Trump stuff for later in the race.
What is that stuff?
I don't know. But if you wanted to bounce Trump from the race, I don't think, you might well save it for January or February. You wouldn't necessarily bring it out now. So one confident prediction is we're going to see a whole lot more anti-Trump oppo come out. And he's Trump. Obviously, there's going to be something there, right? So,
yeah. I've got an anti-Trump Oppo anecdote I'll share with you after we put an end to this because it was given to me off the record. It's not fatal. His fan base would love it, but it's more evidence of how creepy he is.
Oh, okay. Talk about a teaser. Sorry, audience. We can't.
Sorry, audience. But let's see. What should we say? That if they send like donations, anyone who sends a donation of over $1 million to Blogging Heads TV, I will have a conference. You will be part of a conference call in which I disclose this.
Blogging Heads Plus. Slate's trying this.
Blogging Heads Premium.
Premium. Yeah, there you go.
Plus, you get to have lunch with Mickey.
We'll talk about how much that costs after.
Yeah, we will. But we have a picture already of where it would happen because this was in the BuzzFeed piece. There you go, folks. That's where Mickey hangs out.
Bizarrely, that picture was my idea.
It is bizarre because it looks so much like, I mean, people can't see it, but it's red, white, and blue, and then it's got this flag and a heart thing that makes you think it's like this highly nationalist kind of place, and it's, of course, it's only a small step from nationalism to the Aryan nationalism, which in turn is only a small step from Donald Trump. So why would you pick that place? You've
gone insane. It's a coffee shop that has a semi-ironic patriotic motif. But it was bizarre that I would set up this picture to show how isolated I was because of my heterodox immigration views, and sort of help BuzzFeed produce this hatchet job.
Maybe that's what I meant to say. Had I put what I said more soberly, it would have sounded like that. Go ahead.
Every time I read the piece, it doesn't seem like such a hatchet job. So what the hell?
I encourage you to keep thinking that way.
Anyway, have we gone 2 hours?
I don't know. It's only getting worse. But we will link to the BuzzFeed piece, which actually quotes... Oh, by the way, what it quotes me as saying in our dialogue is... it makes no sense. I don't think it's literally what I said. I think there's a typo or something. But anyway, we'll link to it.
Some of the things Ben quotes me as saying I don't think I said either.
Well, this would have been an inadvertent kind of typo, the transposition of a word or something.
What did it quote you as saying you said?
I don't know if you want me to find it. I mean, if people have not been... if you want to entertain people, well, I find it. But since it's not electronic, it may take a while.
Oh, they don't? Okay.
You sure?
Yeah, people can find it themselves.
Okay.
My capacity, my ability to entertain people is limited. I could put on my Trump hat again.
Well, that's not enough. Now that much of our audience is an audio podcast audience, I'm afraid you'll have to sing a Trump song.
That's a horrifying thought.
Well, I can't find this thing. Anyway.
Okay.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year, Mickey. Here's to a happier one. I think the consensus among elites is that we're hoping for a better year than this one was, although the reason for that consensus is largely the emergence of your favorite guy, Donald Trump, so probably you don't share the consensus.
I think it's maybe the emergence of ISIS, Bob.
Yeah, there's that too. The two are related, and they're good business for each other. That's all I've got to say.
God, you've given yourself the last word. Okay.
All right. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
See ya.